In my previous video, I talked about a study that looked specifically at American Christians and how those who believe in a controlling God may be less likely to take action to stop global warming, even though they claim to care about the topic. Today, I'd like to talk about another study that also demonstrates how complicated it can be to figure out how religion might help or harm us as a species. Unlike the previous study, this one specifically looked at the views of religious people, not just in the United States, but around the world, determined to figure out the tricky interaction between science and faith. This study, published this past summer in Social, Psychological, and Personality Science, is titled, "Religious Americans Have Less Positive Attitudes Towards Science, but This Does Not Extend to Other Cultures." Oh, well, thanks for the spoiler alert, assholes. Over the course of 5 different experiments, researchers first polled Americans by asking them to rate their religiosity and their interest in science. In each experiment, they varied how they figured out interest in science, because that's kind of a vague idea. In some experiments, they asked subjects to choose from a list of topics that they wanted to read about. And in others, they asked them to state how much they agree with statements like, "It's not important to know about science in everyday life." But for pretty much every one of these experiments, they found that the more religious a subject was, the less interested in science they were. In a 6th experiment, they looked at international polling data to find that across 40 different countries, there were wild differences between whether people had a similar religion-science correlation as in the United States or no correlation at all. And surprisingly, to me at least, they found that in some countries, there was the opposite, a positive correlation. The more religious people were, the more interested in science they were. So for their 7th and final experiment, the researchers gathered subjects in several different countries. Brazil, the Czech Republic, the Philippines, South Africa, and Sweden. All countries chosen because in the previous experiment, they seemed to have varying levels of correlation between religion and science. And they gave them a similar test to the one that they gave to Americans in that first set of experiments. And they found overall a weak but positive correlation. The more religious a person was, the more interested in science they were. It's all really interesting and particularly robust considering that the studies were registered. They were pre-registered. I've talked about this before, but that means that the researchers submitted their hypotheses and their statistical methods before conducting the research, meaning that they couldn't do any p-hacking. They couldn't take advantage of having a large amount of data that they could then just crunch in different ways until they found a statistically significant effect. In my previous video, I talked about how one of the things that makes it difficult to make a blanket statement about religion, like religion is at odds with science, is because there are so many different ways to be religious, and because religion is so deeply connected to culture. When so many people in a culture are religious, it's hard to tease apart what is actually causing the problem. This research suggests that we can't simply say religion and science are incompatible. That may have some truth here in the United States, but in other countries, the two things are clearly perfectly compatible. And that makes sense. Fundamentalist Christianity in the United States has been particularly focused on placing itself in opposition to science, demanding a literal interpretation of the Bible and pushing that science classes teach the Bible as though the Bible's obvious fables are actually equivalent to the past 2 millennia of scientific inquiry. Atheists may still point out that religion by definition requires belief in the supernatural or in something that cannot be proven, while science requires an understanding of the natural and improving what we may have thought couldn't be proven. Well, first of all, it's not a great definition of religion. There are religions out there with no supernatural beliefs, and there are religions that put knowledge and inquiry up on a pedestal. it's hard to figure out what beliefs we should even call a religion because they're so varied across the planet. And that's why it's so easy to actually understand why there really might not be a blanket incompatibility between science and religion. Because humans have always had weird beliefs, and they always will have weird beliefs, and scientific inquiry has marched on despite those weird beliefs. We don't always call irrational beliefs religion, but they're there just the same. Like scientists like James Watson, who is the father of DNA, but who also holds the irrational, unscientific belief that Black people are genetically inferior to white people. Abject racism isn't a religion, so to speak, but it's just as silly as thinking that a supernatural deity is running the universe full time. Or Pierre Curie. He got a Nobel Prize in physics, but he also thought that psychics could make tables levitate using ghosts, or possibly an unknown medium responsible for radioactivity. Even Isaac Newton was super into astrology and the Philosopher's Stone, which was a rock he thought could give people immortality. So, yes, if you build a religion specifically on the idea that science is heretical, then your religion is incompatible with science. But in general, of course religion is compatible with science. Weird and wrong beliefs can certainly get in the way of scientific progress, but a speed bump isn't a stop sign. And if it were, we would all still be living in the caves trying to figure out what fire is.